What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. I hope you're all doing well. Thanks so much for taking the time out of your day to click on one of my videos. And I'm a little bit late on this one. Last week, if you guys have been watching my videos, you'll know that I was in the UK, and so I fell behind on a couple of videos and a couple of things I wanted to do. And one of those was catching up on the last few episodes of the latest show coming from Marvel Animation, and that show is called Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man. The latest Spider-Man show has come to an end and stars a great cast of people like Hudson Thames, Coleman Domingo, Eugene Bird, Zeno Robinson, Grace Song, and many more. And before we get too far into this video, if you guys are a fan of up-to-date reviews like this, retrospective reviews, early reviews, the occasional vlog, and live stream, then you're in the right place, and I'd like to ask you to consider subscribing. But if you're a returning viewer, well, thanks so much for coming back. And today, like I've already mentioned, we're going to be talking about Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, which is the latest installment into the MCU, kind of. It's coming from Marvel Animation, Marvel Studios, and when this was initially announced, it was called Spider-Man Freshman Year. It was kind of pitched as a prequel to the Tom Holland Spider-Man of the MCU, and in production they pivoted to making this something as more of its own thing. It's its own Spider-Man show with its own version of Spider-Man and its own version of those characters. But in the world of the multiverse, it does kind of have familiar moments from the MCU Spider-Man. There are moments that mimic those moments that are very different. There's even things like the Sokovia Accords that are brought up here, and some characters that are very similar to the versions we saw in the other movies. But this version of the story, these characters, is entirely different. So it's in and of itself, it's its own thing. You don't need to watch this to be up to date with the MCU, but it does some fun things to connect itself not only to the MCU in its own way, but also the other Spider-Man films that have come before. And so going into this show, I was pretty excited, and the base premise of this one is pretty straightforward. It's a coming of age Spider-Man story about him getting bit and becoming Spider-Man and having to figure out how he's going to be Spider-Man. And if you're like me and you grew up with the countless Spider-Man shows when I was a kid, I grew up in the 90s and the early 2000s, and in that time there was a slew of comic book related animated shows and video games that really helped expand my knowledge of these characters, on top of all the comic books I read as well. But as a kid as well, my mom was really big into the Spider-Man shows that had come from before my days, the ones that she loved from the late 60s, well, 70s and the 80s. So I had all of those on DVD. I would sit down and watch them with her all the time. So I've been a lifelong Spider-Man fan. And initially, what grabbed my interest with this show was the art style, which is incredibly inspired by the OG style of comic book art for Spider-Man. I also, like I mentioned, love that original 1960s Spider-Man. So being able to watch this show and have the intro be like a rap theme that also includes the theme from the original Spider-Man TV show, I thought was really cool. There's a lot of nostalgic elements for this show, not only on a music level, but also on a visual level that immediately gripped me in before we even got into the episode of the show. And as the first couple episodes played out, I thought this was fun. This was a cute time. There was tons of cameos and connections to other Marvel related characters. And what I've always loved that the Spider-Man shows are able to do is focus on Spider-Man, but have this big world around him. I've always compared Spider-Man to Batman in the DC world. I think some people would, on the surface level, compare Iron Man and Batman since they're both rich and then they both use gadgets, this, that, and the third. But I've always found Batman and Spider-Man to be similar in the sense that they have a central location that's almost a character in and of itself, New York and Gotham City. You have this character who's swinging around the place. You know, obviously they're different in their own ways, but they're swinging around their city. But most notably, they have an incredibly recognizable rogues gallery of villains. And I think both Spider-Man and Batman, out of any other superheroes, have this ability for you to be like, oh yeah, I know this villain, I know that villain, I know this villain, I know that villain. Whereas if I was to be like, hey, name me 5 Shang-Chi villains, name me 5 Iron Man specific villains, you may not be able to do that as easily, because while there is crossover with a lot of these characters, Spider-Man has his specific ones, same as Batman. So this show did an incredible job of being able to kind of flesh out that world of Spider-Man in the way I grew up seeing it done. We haven't seen that done as much in the movies, where a lot of times it's one main villain, maybe they'll have a side villain in the mix, but they're kind of not really utilized all that well. This show does a good job of focusing on Peter Parker at the center of it and his coming of age story, while introducing tons of characters that are having their own storylines. And while a lot of these kind of coalesce and do kind of come together at a certain point in the show, there are elements about this show that are setting up for season 2, where we have these different storylines going on for various characters. And as a longtime fan, it was great to hear these characters' names before they are the main villain character that they will become, or just see the art style and know this is who that character is going to become. There's a couple of very on-the-nose references as well, and some of the characters are flat out named in this show, but I thought that was really awesome. And I don't want to spoil it too much for anybody who hasn't seen it, but if you watch this show, you'll be quite surprised to see a lot of big heroes that you're excited to see. In the first episode, this isn't really a spoiler, like in the first couple minutes, Doctor Strange appears, which was really cool. You also have, of course, Colman Domingo in this show as Norman Osborn. He's one of the biggest players in here, and man, I would love to see Colman Domingo in the live action MCU as Norman Osborn, even if it's a different iteration of the version that we're seeing here. I would love to see him in the MCU. I thought he did an incredible job as Norman Osborn, which in and of itself are big shoes to fill. Of course, in the animated world, we've had tons of Norman Osborns, but you know, with the live action world, Willem Dafoe has kind of just capitalized on that, and I would love to see Colman Domingo come and bring a completely different take to the character in live action MCU. But outside of those characters, of course, you have like the Harry Osborns in here, but you also have some other great ones that I was surprised to see be such big parts of the show, like Tombstone, as well as characters like Scorpion, Dr. Octopus, the Unicorn. There's some teases for the Rhino as well. One of the main characters is actually a great side character and best friend in the show is Nico Minoru, who's played by Grace Song. Now, Nico Minoru hasn't really been in a lot of on-screen projects. I recently played through the game Midnight Suns that she was in, and I think she was also in one of the live action shows at a certain point in the Marvel TV world before the MCU kind of took over the TV world of Marvel projects. But outside of that, she's a character I'm mostly familiar with from the comics, and I think that this show does a great job of kind of expanding upon her character. You know, she is kind of like an annoying side character at points of the show. She's kind of that friend who is kind of that rift between the new Spider-Man life that Peter is living and the old life he had before he was truly Spider-Man. And I think they, you know, do some interesting things there, some familiar things that you've seen in Spider-Man stories before and in just stories in general, when one character is starting to kind of branch out in their life and they kind of start to feel like they're leaving behind their friend that was always there for them before they were ever something. And so, you know, there's definitely a familiar element there. Nico's a little bit annoying at points in the show, but I did enjoy her character most than anything. I really enjoyed the little teases as to who she does become in the comic books, which is a pretty badass character. I've always thought she's got a lot of really cool elements about her. She's got a cool power set, and I just think she's a character that's really underutilized in a lot of the on-screen projects. But it's been great in recent years, I guess within the last decade, to see her now in this, see her in things like that video game Midnight Suns, and in that show that she was in as well. What the name is escaping me right now, because I don't think that show really went anywhere after that first season or so. But anyway, I didn't really watch that show properly, I won't lie. But yeah, overall, I was really into this show in terms of making the world of Spider-Man feel big, having all these different characters in the mix, and doing such a great job to balance it all. It never really felt like it was overstuffed. It felt like it very much kind of knew what it was trying to focus on. It had side plots that didn't really need to be integral to Spider-Man's storyline, but would coalesce later on in a way that made sense and never felt like it was too jam-packed or messy in any way, shape, or form. There was a lot of teases of things to come, like I've already mentioned, but also a lot that was on the bone here already. There was a lot of meat on the bone within the story that's being played out here, specifically in Peter's storyline. And I think in a world where we've had so many coming-of-age Spider-Man stories in the animated world in particular, it could be something that feels very just like overdone. And while I think some people may feel that while watching the show, I think for the most part, this show does a good job of making it its own thing, having its own identity, giving Spider-Man his own trials and tribulations within this show, this storyline. The stakes here feel big, and there's a lot of fun humor in here as well. Spider-Man, of course, is a very light and fun character, and ultimately that's what I felt watching these episodes at a certain point. It was just fun. This was a show that definitely kept my interest while I watched the episodes. It was an easy breeze, 10 episodes, most of them about 30 minutes or so, and it felt like the episodes breezed by. They were very well paced. There was never any boring downtime where I was like, I don't know if I'm liking this episode. For the most part, I found myself really engaged in the world of Spider-Man, and I think the best Spider-Man shows do just that, give you a sense of the world of New York, all the characters at play, while also centering the story on Spider-Man. And I think the guy who played Spider-Man in this, Hudson Thames, does a great job of very much bringing that nerdy Peter Parkerism, that awkwardness that comes from that character, but also that quippy, lighthearted tone that you need from the character when he's in the suit. There was a lot of great moments here, and I would say that the biggest standout outside of him is without a doubt Colman Domingo as Norman Osborn. As I already mentioned, I would love to see him in the live action world, and I think he did an incredible job here playing a character character that you trust fully as he takes Spider-Man under his wing, but also a character that, because you know who Norman Osborn is in other iterations, you aren't necessarily fully sure if you should trust this character just yet. But ultimately, I thought that Colman Domingo did a great job of bringing that confidence and that nuance to the character, that menace to the character as well, that predictability, but also that unpredictability of the character. Can you trust him? Can you not trust him? Is he a good guy? Is he not a good guy? Definitely really enjoyed that element. And again, I loved seeing all the cameos. I don't want to spoil it, but there's quite a few other cameos that are actually voiced by actors who have played these characters in the past. One that I'll throw in here that I thought was funny was the character of Cleve, played by Zach Cherry. And if you've been watching the MCU, he's appeared in things like Shang-Chi and some of the other Spider-Man films, usually the guy who pulls out his phone and says something funny. And it was just funny to see animation version of him here, and the fact that they've continued to kind of throw that character in a bunch of random Marvel projects. But yeah, overall, I think Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man is a great installment into the Marvel universe right now. Again, this is more of a multiverse, its own universe kind of thing. It's not tied directly to the MCU, but I think it does some fun things to connect itself through references and lines of dialogue and some certain moments that are very similar to what happened in the MCU, or just from lines of dialogue that reference other Spider-Man movies, to make it feel like it's part of that big Spider-Man mythology in a lot of ways. And it just ultimately was a good fun time. It breezed by and it left things open for a second season, while also having a really compelling and interesting story around Peter Parker within this season in and of itself. And I'm excited to see what they end up doing. I'm excited to see what the next animated show coming from Marvel Animation is. I would say that this is probably one of my favorite things to come from the Marvel Studios world in terms of TV, I would think, in general. I mean, there's a lot that I've really enjoyed. I've praised a lot of the Marvel shows, but you know, it almost made me want an animated Marvel universe right now instead of some of the live action stuff we're getting, which again, I'm enjoying a lot of the live action stuff, but it almost gave it a new energy seeing all these characters appear and seeing all these teasers of big Spider-Man villains and stuff. I think it kind of put us in a place where I would love to see them do more in this animation space to kind of excite me again and make me feel like a kid. That's what it made me feel like. It's made me feel like a kid that was watching those old school cartoons, reading those comics, playing those video games that had all these characters in the mix. And I think in recent years, one of the biggest criticisms that a lot of the Marvel projects have had is a lack of that, you know, that crossover, that fun crossover of this character appearing in this movie to kind of have fun with this character or save the day or whatever the case may be. While we see that a little bit, and there's some stuff coming up that is definitely going to lean back into that, I think that it's something that's been lacking. And so to see an animated show do such a great job of centering the story on Peter Parker and Spider-Man, but having so many characters at play that make it feel like a fun sandbox without feeling overstuffed, I think is something to definitely praise this show. I enjoyed it way more than I thought I was going to, even though I'm a lifelong Spider-Man fan and I've seen every animated Spider-Man show. But this, without a doubt, was definitely up there, I think, as one of the cooler and most interesting Spider-Man shows, especially with the animation style and the overall tone of the show. So a big thanks to all of you guys for watching, and I look forward to hearing what you guys have to say. Are you guys a fan of this show? Did you check it out? And if you didn't check it out, I recommend checking it out. Whatever the case may be, leave any and all comments down below, and I'll see you beautiful people in the next one. Bye-bye.